The Pentagon's conference room hummed with quiet urgency, a low tide of murmurs, clinking mugs and shuffling papers. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, catching the polished brass fixtures and casting a soft glow across the rows of chairs. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped inside, her posture straight, uniform crisp and flawless, every crease and pin in place. The navy whites she wore seemed almost ceremonial, in contrast to the casual authority of some of the officers already seated. She carried a thick binder, her meticulously prepared slides, and a small leather notebook scribbled with months of research. She had walked this hall countless times, but today felt different, a mix of anticipation and irritation tightening in her chest. Her plan had been simple: walk in, set up, and deliver one of the most important briefings of her career. The data she had compiled could save lives overseas, predicting insurgent movements and pinpointing supply routes that had eluded U.S. intelligence for months. She had drilled her opening lines repeatedly, imagining the sharp, expectant gazes of officers and the way her words might cut through bureaucracy to provoke action. Yet, before she could even approach the projector, a colonel with a sharp nose and sharper tongue waved her toward the side of the room, where the coffee station stood. "Lieutenant," he said, voice dripping with mild condescension, "keep the pots full. We'll let the briefings come later." The room rippled with a few quiet chuckles, and Sarah's jaw tightened. She felt the familiar burn of irritation, but forced herself to inhale slowly, the way instructors had taught her to control stress under pressure. She had survived Hell Week, swim tests in freezing Pacific surf, and endless push-ups until her bones ached all to earn the trident on her finger. Yet here, among officers who had never faced real combat, she was reduced to pouring coffee. She set her binder down on a nearby table, careful not to wrinkle the pages. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, warm and almost comforting, but it was undercut by the hum of authority and expectation around her. Her fingers brushed against her right hand, where a small gold ring gleamed, the unmistakable trident of a Navy SEAL. Less than 20 women had ever completed the grueling basic underwater demolition SEAL BUD-S training. She was one of them. The ring wasn't jewelry. It was a testament to pain, resilience, and survival. As she moved from chair to chair, offering mugs and refills, her mind drifted to the months of preparation for this briefing. Late nights spent cross-referencing satellite images, coding logistical models, analyzing insurgent patterns. Every slide in her binder represented a calculation, a projection, a hypothesis grounded in hours of field interviews and debriefs from operatives on the ground. She had learned early that preparation wasn't just about information. It was about anticipation, about knowing the questions before they were asked and having the answers ready in real time. The officers barely acknowledged her presence. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others whispered jokes behind their hands. Each dismissive glance was like a needle pressed against her patience. Sarah remembered the countless moments during her training when she had been underestimated, mocked by instructors, called weak by teammates, but she had learned a truth that others rarely understood. Patience and control were weapons as powerful as any rifle or strategy. She could have reacted, snapped at the colonel, demanded respect, but that would have played into their assumptions. Instead, she focused on executing the simplest task perfectly, serving the coffee with precision, grace, and an air of unspoken authority. The general, sitting at the head of the table, was busy reviewing his notes. Major General Carter had the kind of eyes that missed nothing sharp, calculating, and trained to detect competence instantly. He didn't notice the murmuring officers or the misplaced hierarchy, but something about Sarah's movements caught his attention. Perhaps it was the steadiness with which she balanced the mugs, the calm precision of her hands, or the way she carried herself despite the subtle humiliation. There was an aura of discipline, of quiet command, that contrasted sharply with the casual arrogance of the room. As Sarah refilled Carter's cup, he finally looked up, and his gaze fell on her hand. The trident caught the light, glinting sharply. Carter's brow furrowed. He had seen a few seals in his career, enough to recognize the weight behind that symbol. The trident was not just a ring, it was a statement. It was blood-earned and struggle-forged, and it spoke to endurance and elite, skill that few could comprehend. He tapped his pen against the table, a subtle gesture that commanded attention, and observed her quietly. Who was this woman they had relegated to serving coffee? Meanwhile, Sarah kept moving, pouring and placing mugs with the same meticulous care she had applied to every task in the military. She reflected on the irony. She had endured surf, sand, and stone. She had crawled through freezing water and dragged boats through mud, yet here she was being judged by appearances. The injustice stung, but she had learned to channel that fire into focus. She reminded herself of every challenge she had overcome. The physical collapse, the mental exhaustion, the quiet whispers of, "You can't do this," from men far larger and more aggressive. Each doubt had been a fuel, each insult a stepping stone to mastery. Her eyes wandered across the table as she scanned the officers. There were analysts who had never seen combat, colonels who had spent more time in offices than in the field, and junior officers trying to assert authority by imposing hierarchy. None seemed to notice the contradiction. Her youth and presence belied the experience hidden beneath her uniform. A smile threatened to break, but she kept it contained. She knew the storm was coming, the moment when competence would override arrogance, when preparation would silence ridicule. It was a waiting game, and Sarah had never lost at waiting. The coffee machine hissed, the last cup steaming. Sarah adjusted the strap of her binder, her mind running through her briefing slides. Enemy supply chains, logistical vulnerabilities, troop deployments, all the intelligence she had gathered was poised to shift the balance of a mission overseas. It was dangerous work, precise and delicate, and she had honed every detail. She imagined the faces of soldiers depending on this strategy for safety. Every analysis, every recommendation wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a matter of life and death. Then she heard it, a cough from the head of the table. "General." Carter had leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. He didn't speak, but the tension shifted. Others in the room were still preoccupied with petty jokes and whispers, oblivious to the storm about to break. Carter's eyes, however, missed nothing. The trident glimmered, and the recognition struck. He knew what she represented, what she had survived, and what she could bring to the table if given the chance. The room was about to be redefined by one simple observation, a symbol of elite skill, overlooked, standing quietly in plain sight. Sarah's fingers brushed the trident again. It wasn't just a ring. It was history, endurance, and promise, all condensed into gold. She poured the final cup, set it down with precision, and straightened, ready to meet the eyes of those who had dismissed her. The waiting game was almost over. She had endured mockery, she had endured invisibility, and she had endured doubt, but she had also endured training that forged her into someone who could command respect without demanding it. And today, it would matter. A faint murmur ran through the room, unnoticed by most, but felt in the air. Sarah's patience, discipline, and preparation coalesced into a single moment that was about to unfold. The binder in her hand, the slides. She had rehearsed countless times, and the unassuming demeanor that had masked her experience. All of it waited for the attention it deserved. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Soon, the room would learn what she had carried silently all these years. For now, she moved with quiet authority, a soldier in the midst of bureaucratic theater, ready to turn invisibility into impact. The conference room seemed to shrink around her, the ambient chatter fading into background noise. Officers shifted, unaware that their assumptions were about to be challenged. Sarah felt a familiar thrill, the kind that surged before every crucial operation, before every dive into freezing surf, before every mission where success meant survival. She had prepared for this. She had trained for this. And now she waited for the right moment, for the right eyes to notice, for the trident to speak louder than her temporary role as a coffee server. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed almost deafening as Sarah moved quietly between the chairs, coffee pot in hand. Each step was deliberate, precise, almost surgical in its calmness. She could feel the weight of the rooms. Judgment, the subtle sneers from officers who assumed that her only purpose here was to serve. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, her mind raced with recollections that were far from ordinary. She remembered the chill of pre-dawn mornings on Coronado Beach, her skin raw from salt and sand, the relentless tide hammering at her body during Hell Week. She had endured every element, every physical torment, and every mental whisper of quit. Now, that tried to invade her mind. The memory of those whispers was vivid, the mocking voices of instructors, men who had underestimated her simply because of her gender. "This isn't a game for girls," they'd sneered. "Ring the bell if you can't handle it." Every time she had wanted to stop, the urge to quit had come like a knife, pressing against her resolve. She remembered the moments of utter physical collapse, her lungs screaming in the freezing surf, hands blistered and torn, muscles trembling violently from exhaustion. She had stared at the line in the sand and told herself that quitting was never an option. That persistence, above all, would define her. Now, in the polished, quiet room of the Pentagon, the irony was palpable. Here she was, not in freezing water or crawling through mud, but delivering coffee to officers who were less disciplined, less experienced, and utterly oblivious to the magnitude of her accomplishments. She could have let the frustration boil over, snapped at the colonel, or walked out, but she didn't. She had learned that control was a weapon more precise, more effective than anger. In this setting, patience could dismantle arrogance far more effectively than confrontation. Her strength had never relied on recognition. It relied on action and preparation. As she refilled a mug for a lieutenant sitting near the back, she silently catalogued the officers' behavior, noting their subtle hierarchy of authority. Some avoided eye contact entirely, too smug to acknowledge her presence, while others whispered jokes meant to diminish her. She recognized the patterns instantly. This was classic underestimation at work. And yet, she held herself with perfect poise, letting every movement be precise, silent, and intentional. She reminded herself that timing mattered. One glance, one question, one well-timed reveal could shift this room entirely. And she was ready. Her attention occasionally flicked to the binder at the side table, the notes she had prepared meticulously for weeks. Every chart, every analysis, every tactical recommendation had been refined for maximum impact. Enemy supply lines, insurgent, routes, vulnerabilities in their logistics. All of it sat ready for deployment in the form of intelligence that could save lives. The irony gnawed at her. All this, and the colonel had deemed her less important than the pot of coffee she carried. Still, she suppressed irritation, channeling it into sharp observation and quiet resolve. Her gaze shifted toward Major General Carter, seated at the head of the table. His posture was relaxed, hands folded neatly in front of him, eyes scanning. His notes, but she felt it, even without his gaze meeting hers yet. There was an unmistakable energy in the way he observed the room, the quiet authority that only years of experience could hone. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes flicked toward her. Not the uniform, not the coffee potter. The precision of her movements, the calmness, the subtle aura of command. Something about her demeanor made him pause. The glint of gold on her right hand caught the light, and Carter's experienced eyes instantly recognized the seal trident. The ring was small but unmistakable, a symbol few women had earned, and even fewer officers had seen in real life. Carter's mind quickly recalibrated, connecting the dots, the poise, the calm, the discipline. It wasn't just professionalism. It was battle-hardened experience. He leaned forward slightly, tapping his pen against the table, a subtle but deliberate signal that drew his focus entirely toward Sarah. The moment was delicate. The room continued in its quiet hum, oblivious, unaware that the dynamic was about to shift entirely. Sarah, unaware of the exact nature of Carter's recognition, but attuned to the subtle energy shift in the room, adjusted the strap of her binder and exhaled slowly. Her fingers brushed the trident again. That small piece of gold had seen more than most officers in the room could imagine. It had been earned in freezing water, through brutal training exercises, long nights with minimal sleep, and through sheer physical and mental endurance. The weight of the ring was symbolic, but its power in this moment was more practical than ceremonial. It represented authority earned through action, not rank. As she moved to place a fresh mug in front of a group of analysts, she noticed subtle signs of curiosity. Eyes darted toward the trident. Whispers began, but they were almost silent, a ripple rather than a wave. The colonel continued his briefing, unaware of the changing tide in perception. Sarah had learned to detect these tiny shifts over the years' momentary recognition, a flicker of understanding, the first crack in arrogance's facade. She poured another cup with steady hands, silently marking the officers who had begun to take notice, noting those whose judgment remained clouded by preconceived notions. Her mind wandered briefly to the time she had spent in BUDS training, hours upon hours of preparation, endless drills, constant testing, both physical and psychological. She remembered being submerged under icy water, the world turning to white. Lungs screaming, muscles failing, her body on the brink of collapse. She had pushed through, because stopping had never been an option. And here, in a room that lacked danger but overflowed with ego, she drew strength from that same discipline. She had survived far worse. This was merely patience in a different form. The colonel's voice droned on, enumerating statistics and operational projections, oblivious to the tension building. Sarah's focus remained absolute. She memorized the seating arrangement, the patterns of distraction, and the occasional glimpses of curiosity directed at the gold trident. In her experience, the moment to strike, the moment to command respect, came not from immediate confrontation, but from demonstration. She had learned the value of timing through countless drills, timed exercises, and combat simulations. Every second here was a preparation for the reveal, the moment when knowledge and experience would demand attention. As she placed the last cup of coffee in front of a nervous-looking junior officer, she allowed herself a moment to glance at the binder again. Inside were not just slides, they were a roadmap of strategy. Intelligence meticulously cross-referenced with field reports, logistical predictions, and tactical innovations. Every chart had been modeled against historical data. Every recommendation had been field-tested with operatives who trusted her judgment. The data was solid, the predictions reliable, and the strategy sound. She had created something that could save lives and shift operations. The injustice of the moment, reduced to coffee service, was almost laughable, but she did not laugh. She prepared. Carter's gaze, meanwhile, remained fixed. He had been around enough to recognize elite competence, and in that moment, he saw what others did not. A SEAL, a woman, standing quietly in a room full of officers who had underestimated her. The pattern was clear: poise under duress, calm efficiency, and the physical reminder on her finger, a ring few earned, fewer still survived. His mind raced, thinking ahead to how this officer, misjudged by her peers, could be utilized effectively. The moment for correction, for acknowledgement, was approaching, and Carter was already planning how to make it decisive. Sarah felt a faint shift in the room's atmosphere, almost imperceptible. Officers who had been distracted were now more alert, some stealing glances at her hand, some whispering quietly. The subtle tension in the air was palpable. She moved with the same deliberate calm, placing the mugs on tables, noting each reaction. She didn't yet speak, didn't yet draw attention to herself beyond her assigned task. She knew that action, not argument, would determine respect. In the silent power of observation and perfect execution, she wielded more authority than any word could convey. And so, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell continued, coffee in hand, binder ready, heart steady. Beneath the calm exterior was the same fire that had carried her through surf, sand, and blood. Every detail mattered, the placement of mugs, the adjustment of chairs, the subtle awareness of who noticed and who did not. She was invisible to many, underestimated by most, yet fully present and fully prepared. Soon, very soon, the room would realize what they had overlooked. Until that moment, she poured, she observed, and she waited. The storm was approaching, and Lieutenant Mitchell was ready. The room had grown quieter, though the officers didn't realize it. The gentle clatter of pens and papers seemed distant now, almost muffled beneath the weight of perception, shifting imperceptibly. Major General Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. Every step she had taken, every precise movement while serving coffee, had been a silent announcement of capability. He had seen enough in his years to recognize competence without being told, and what he now observed was unmistakable. She was not merely disciplined, she was elite. The subtle glow of the gold trident on her finger gleamed like a beacon of authority. Sarah remained outwardly calm, her mind attuned to the subtle energy changes in the room. She could sense glances flicking her way, quiet whispers beneath hands, the tiny shift in posture from officers who now realized they had misjudged her. The colonel, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued with his monotonous briefing. But Sarah's awareness of every micro-expression, every breath, and every twitch in the room had already positioned her far ahead of the hierarchy. She had learned in Bud S. that success often came not from brute strength alone, but from patience, observation, and the perfect timing of action. Her thoughts drifted briefly to that first day at Coronado, the moment she had first glimpsed the rigors of SEAL training. She remembered the ocean cold, relentless, indifferent. Each wave battered her body, forcing her to fight, to endure, to adapt. She had watched others fall, surrender, and ring the bell. She had refused, and in that refusal, she had earned a path few had dared to tread. A trident was more than a ring. It was the embodiment of every struggle she had survived. It was a silent testament that she had faced fear and pain and emerged unbroken. Now, in a sterile conference room hundreds of miles from the crashing surf, that same endurance was at play, albeit in a different form. The challenge here was social, psychological, and tactical. How do you command respect in a room full of officers who believed hierarchy, not merit, dictated authority? Sarah had studied human behavior as meticulously as she had studied enemy patterns. She knew the moment would arrive when observation alone would not suffice. That moment required assertion swift, confident, and undeniable. Carter's gaze shifted to her binder, lying untouched on the side table. He could almost feel the potential within it, the latent power that had yet to be unleashed. The colonel had dismissed her in mere seconds, blind to the strategy she carried and the life-saving intelligence she had compiled. Carter thought about how often the military misjudged talent based on appearances. Too often, he had seen capable officers overlooked because of gender, age, or simply the misperceptions of those too rigidly attached to protocol. But he did not make that mistake. He had learned to watch, to wait, and to act decisively when recognition was warranted. Sarah's movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. Each cup of coffee she poured, each placement on the table, was executed with the precision of a drill she had repeated countless times. She was a shadow in the room, yet her shadow cast authority. Officers shifted unconsciously, their own ego temporarily displaced by the subtle command emanating from her calm demeanor. She noted the colonel's slightly uneven breathing, a telltale sign of subconscious discomfort. Even he could sense, albeit faintly, that his assumptions had been incorrect. Her mind returned to the binder and the months of preparation. Every statistic, every map, every tactical projection represented countless hours of work. She had scoured intelligence reports, field interviews, and operational logs to produce a coherent, actionable plan. The briefing was more than theoretical. It was battle-tested in simulations and based on real-world conditions. If implemented, it could disrupt enemy operations, save countless lives, and shift strategic advantage. And yet, the room treated it as secondary to the coffee she carried. A small, private smile flickered across her face. They would learn. Soon. Carter tapped his pen again, a deliberate, quiet rhythm that drew his full attention back to Sarah. He noted her steady breathing, the subtle adjustments of her posture, and the confidence in her stride, despite the implicit humiliation. His eyes narrowed slightly, appreciating the discipline of a trained warrior who understood the power of observation and timing. He had watched many officers falter under scrutiny, their arrogance clouding judgment. But Sarah was different. The room's current dynamic was precarious, and the potential impact of her competence was about to be revealed. The officers, still unaware of Carter's silent recognition, began to show tiny signs of acknowledgement. Eyes that had previously dismissed her were now directed toward the trident. Subtle nods and slight changes in posture marked the first shifts of awareness. Whispered questions, barely audible, circulated among those seated near her. The colonel continued, yet he could not completely ignore the ripples of curiosity. Sarah noted these reactions with quiet satisfaction. She understood that in leadership, the perception of competence could be as potent as competence itself, and she intended to make both undeniable. Her thoughts wandered briefly to the intensity of field operations she had experienced. She recalled missions where every decision mattered, where hesitation could mean disaster, and where success relied on anticipating the enemy's moves with precision. The stakes here were different, yet the principles were identical. Observation, preparation, timing, and execution would define the outcome. And she was prepared. The trident on her finger was more than a symbol. It was a tool, a reminder of resilience, strategy, and authority earned through struggle. Sarah continued her measured pace through the room, placing mugs with flawless attention to detail. She observed micro-expressions, the tightening of a jaw, the raised brow, a subtle leaning forward that betrayed interest. Each movement told a story. Each glance offered information. She catalogued it silently, noting which officers would require more assertive action to command attention, and which would respond to quiet demonstration. The patterns were familiar. She had encountered similar dynamics countless times in training and operations. The room was an obstacle course, and she navigated it as she would a tactical mission, with precision, awareness, and patience. Carter's mind returned to the trident, and the realization crystallized. Here was someone who had endured, succeeded, and emerged with unparalleled competence. And yet, she had been dismissed in a trivial role. He considered the implications, not just for the briefing at hand, but for operational effectiveness across units. The room contained valuable minds, yet many had been misaligned by perception rather than reality. He knew the moment to act was imminent. Recognition, properly applied, could realign the chain of influence and command. And Lieutenant Mitchell was about to demonstrate why. Sarah's patience remained unwavering. She had learned long ago that moments of visibility required timing. The audience, however unaware, was already primed for the revelation of her capability. Observers often misjudge, underestimate, and ignore, but discipline ensures readiness for when perception shifts. Every subtle observation she made, every careful movement, ensured that she was prepared to command attention at the perfect instant. The coffee service, the measured steps, the quiet demeanor each had been part of the strategy, an elegant demonstration of restraint and control. Finally, Carter's voice broke the room's near silence. "Lieutenant Mitchell." The sound was calm but carried authority. Heads turned, eyes widened. All attention converged upon her. She straightened, placing the coffee pot down, and met his gaze. The moment had arrived. Every ounce of preparation, every memory of hardship, every detail of discipline coalesced into readiness. She was no longer serving coffee. She was about to deliver the intelligence, command respect, and reclaim her rightful place in the room. The storm was coming, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was at its center. The gentle murmur of papers and half-hearted shuffling fell into an uneasy silence as Major General Carter's voice cut through the air. "Lieutenant Mitchell." The room's energy shifted immediately, though most officers hadn't yet registered. "Why?" Heads turned. Some were startled, others confused. Sarah straightened instinctively, the coffee pot still warm in her hands. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, taking in the faces of those who had underestimated her, and then landed squarely on Carter. His piercing gaze was no longer casual observation. It carried purpose, authority, and a clear signal that she was no longer invisible. She placed the coffee pot on a side table, her fingers brushing the gold trident with subtle reassurance. The trident gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a small, silent emblem of her history, resilience, and the trials she had endured to earn it. Less than 20 women had ever completed BDS training, surviving every physical and mental test, designed to crush both body and spirit. And here she was, standing poised in a room where rank had temporarily overridden competence, ready to demonstrate precisely why the trident commanded attention. Carter's voice rose slightly, a sharp note of authority cutting through the room. "That is a seal trident on your hand, isn't it?" The question hung in the air like a lightning strike. The officers froze. Several of them finally registered what they had overlooked: the gold emblem of elite training, endurance, and battlefield experience. The colonel's face flushed crimson, his earlier mockery dissipating under the weight of sudden awareness. Sarah's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not out of arrogance, but for the quiet satisfaction of finally being recognized. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice calm, precise, and unwavering. The room's previous hierarchy felt suddenly fragile, like paper in a storm. Carter leaned slightly forward, steepling his fingers in thought. "Then why aren't you giving this briefing?" His tone was measured, but every word carried a subtle authority that left no room for evasion. The colonel's attempt to interject fell flat, stammering under Carter's focused gaze. "Sir, she wasn't on the schedule," he muttered, flustered and unprepared for the shift in power. Carter's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to lean in, collectively holding its breath. "You should be briefing us," Carter said simply, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Your presence here has been wasted on coffee duty." A murmur ran through the officers as the room's perception of hierarchy and competence began to recalibrate in real time. Sarah retrieved her binder, adjusting the strap of her uniform and straightening her posture. Every movement was deliberate, commanding subtle authority without a word. The shift was palpable. Those who had ignored her, who had dismissed her presence, now felt the quiet weight of her capability. She approached the projector, her steps measured and confident. The colonel, red-faced, fumbled for his notes, suddenly aware of his misjudgment. Sarah clicked the first slide into view. A detailed map of enemy supply routes filled the screen, precise and color-coded, overlaid with intelligence gathered from months of fieldwork and simulations. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who had survived situations far more dangerous than a quiet conference room. These supply chains are the lifelines for insurgent operations. Disrupt them here, and we gain a strategic advantage that could save countless lives. The officers leaned forward instinctively, their previous dismissal replaced with intense curiosity. Sarah continued, methodically walking them through her analysis. Every statistic was backed with field reports, every recommendation grounded in operational experience. She illustrated the vulnerabilities, highlighting choke points, logistical weaknesses, and potential interventions that could cripple enemy operations without unnecessary risk to U.S. personnel. Her slides were not merely theoretical. They reflected lived reality, honed through training, simulations, and the relentless pursuit of precision. Carter interjected at appropriate moments, posing pointed questions. How quickly could these routes be neutralized? What contingencies exist for civilian presence in the area? Each question was answered with clarity, drawing on her extensive preparation and direct knowledge of operational tactics. The officers, some of whom had previously whispered doubts, now scribbled notes furiously. Even the colonel, face pale, could not hide the admiration and perhaps embarrassment at having underestimated her. Sarah's voice carried strength, but not arrogance. Every word, every gesture was calculated to demonstrate competence and command respect without the need for theatrics. She referenced simulations and field intel seamlessly, interweaving practical strategies with predictive modeling that few in the room had anticipated. The more she spoke, the more the officers realized that this was not just a briefing, it was a demonstration of applied expertise, a blueprint that could decisively influence operations. As she progressed through her slides, Carter's eyes lingered on the subtle details, her meticulous preparation, the clarity of thought, the ability to anticipate questions before they were asked. The room had shifted, the dynamic had inverted. What had started as humiliation being assigned coffee duty had transformed into the moment where Sarah's skill, knowledge, and presence commanded undivided attention. The colonel no longer had influence. The room had recalibrated around her authority. She paused at a particularly complex slide, showing intersecting supply routes and predicted enemy movements. Notice here, she said, pointing with a laser pointer. These are the vulnerable junctions. If we deploy limited resources strategically, we can intercept the majority of supply traffic, drastically reducing enemy capability. The subtle confidence in her tone was backed by certainty, the kind that comes from experience and repeated success under pressure. The officers leaned in, absorbing every detail, recognizing the depth of insight that few could match. For a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself a private acknowledgement of her journey. From freezing surf and relentless mud drills to surviving the grueling days of Hell Week, she had endured humiliation, pain, and doubt. Yet she had emerged with mastery and resilience. The trident on her finger was more than symbolic. It was proof of endurance, of skill, of a lifetime shaped by trials others could scarcely imagine. And now, in this room, that endurance was translating into influence, respect, and authority. The final slides concluded with actionable strategies, complete with contingencies and predictive outcomes. Sarah closed her binder, her calm presence commanding the room's full attention. Carter nodded approvingly, leaning back in his chair, fully aware of the significance of what had just transpired. The officers, previously indifferent or dismissive, now regarded her with admiration and perhaps a quiet recognition of their own misjudgment. The moment had arrived where competence had eclipsed assumption, where preparation and resilience overcame superficial hierarchy. A low murmur spread among the officers, no longer whispers of mockery, but discussions about the implications of her strategy. Carter's voice broke the chatter. "Lieutenant Mitchell, outstanding work. This is not just analysis, it's operational intelligence that could redefine the field. Your insights are invaluable." Sarah allowed a small, controlled smile. The room's perception had shifted entirely. She had transformed what began as a minor humiliation into a display of mastery and authority, redefining how those around her saw competence. The colonel muttered an apology, barely audible, but Sarah did not acknowledge it. Professionalism demanded composure. Vindication required none. She had earned their respect through demonstration, not confrontation. Every movement, every word, had been deliberate, and the outcome spoke louder than any criticism could. The trident glimmered subtly in the fluorescent light, a reminder of trials survived and authority earned. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter 1, where assumptions would no longer dictate her value or influence. As the meeting concluded, Carter rose and spoke again, his tone deliberate and resonant. "Lieutenant Mitchell, your strategy will be implemented for field operations immediately. Prepare your task force. You will lead the initiative." The announcement sent a ripple through the room. Officers exchanged glances, some impressed, others silently chastened for underestimating her. Sarah straightened, calm and collected. She had anticipated moments like this, prepared for recognition, responsibility, and leadership. The trident on her finger was no longer just symbolic. It was a testament to readiness and authority fully realized. She collected her binder and equipment, moving with the same deliberate grace that had carried her through the briefing. Officers who had laughed moments ago now observed quietly, some offering nods of acknowledgement. The colonel hung back, chastened, yet unable to deny her influence. Carter's gaze followed her, confident in the judgment he had just witnessed. For Sarah, the satisfaction was quiet but profound. She had endured, persisted, and now commanded not through rank alone, but through the undeniable combination of skill, preparation, and experience. And as she left the room, the officers whispered, scribbled notes, and recalibrated their assumptions. The moment had been subtle yet monumental. Coffee had been served, yes, but strategy, intelligence, and authority had been commanded in its stead. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had transformed a brief humiliation into a defining victory, one that would echo through the corridors of the Pentagon long after the coffee cooled. The room had shifted entirely since Sarah Mitchell had taken control of the briefing. The initial murmurs, the soft chuckles at her supposed coffee duty, were replaced with focused attention, pens scratching notes, heads nodding thoughtfully. Her slides displayed intricate maps of insurgent supply lines, overlapping networks, and potential choke points, all overlaid with intelligence gathered from months of fieldwork. Every piece of data was precise, actionable, and meticulously sourced. What had started as a routine briefing had evolved into a masterclass in strategy, discipline, and applied intelligence. The officers leaned forward, some unconsciously adjusting their posture to indicate attentiveness. Sarah spoke with the calm confidence of someone whose authority was earned through extremes few could comprehend. "These supply chains are fragile, but highly adaptive," she explained, pointing to a network of routes on the map. "They rely on predictable intersections, rest points, and resupply nodes. If we target the junctions highlighted here, using minimal forces for maximal impact, we can disrupt their operations without unnecessary exposure to risk." She clicked to the next slide, showing predicted enemy responses, complete with alternative routes and contingency models. The room absorbed every detail. Her words were clear, precise, almost surgical in their delivery. A junior officer, previously whispering to a colleague, suddenly raised a hand. "Lieutenant Mitchell, what about civilian traffic along those routes? Couldn't that compromise the operation?" Sarah nodded, acknowledging the concern with a subtle professional smile. "Excellent question. Each choke point has been evaluated for collateral presence. Our recommended operations include temporary reroutes and precise engagement windows to minimize civilian exposure. We've run multiple simulations, and these strategies have been modeled for both effectiveness and safety. The mission isn't just about disruption, it's about calculated precision." Her voice carried the weight of real-world experience, the kind of authority only hard-earned knowledge could command. Major General Carter, seated at the head of the table, interjected at that moment, amplifying the impact of her authority. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you've clearly anticipated operational challenges most would overlook. Can you walk us through the contingency protocols if enemy forces attempt unexpected maneuvers?" Sarah clicked her pointer, bringing up a slide detailing adaptive responses, timing sequences, and rapid decision pathways. The key is flexibility combined with real-time intelligence. Our units are trained to adapt instantly, using both human observation and drone feed coordination. If the enemy diverges from predicted routes, our secondary checkpoints and responsive teams mitigate their movement without escalating conflict unnecessarily. The colonel, red-faced and silent, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His earlier dismissal of her capability now seemed almost grotesque in retrospect. Other officers, previously skeptical, whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that conveyed newfound respect tinged with embarrassment. Sarah ignored the distraction. Her focus remained unbroken, unwavering. She had trained for environments far harsher than this room. She knew the power of silence, observation, and steady authority. Every question, every slide, every measured response was designed not just to convey information, but to command respect. And it worked. As she progressed, Sarah revealed layers of intelligence that few had expected. Predictive patterns of enemy behavior, timing cycles for resupply convoys, and vulnerabilities in local communication networks were outlined with clarity. "This is not theory," she emphasized, her voice steady. "These are actionable strategies, field-tested simulations with clear outcomes. The accuracy of these models has been verified against historical operations and direct reconnaissance reports." Her gaze swept the room, making eye contact with officers who had moments ago overlooked her. Each connection strengthened her authority. Each nod and note-taking reinforced the shift from skepticism to recognition. A lieutenant near the back raised his pen hesitantly. "Lieutenant Mitchell, how confident are we in the success rates of these interceptions?" Sarah paused briefly, ensuring that every nuance of her answer resonated. "Our models predict a success rate exceeding 80% under controlled conditions," she said. "The margin of error has been mitigated through multiple simulations, contingency planning, and direct intelligence verification. That's not a guess. That's operational certainty based on preparation and adaptive strategy. In the field, every detail counts, and our plan accounts for both predictability and unpredictability." Her voice conveyed authority without arrogance, calculated, precise, and commanding. Carter nodded subtly, impressed by both her knowledge and her composure. The officers around him, now fully attentive, scribbled notes and whispered observations. The room was transformed. What had begun as a coffee-serving task had evolved into a demonstration of mastery. Sarah had reclaimed authority not through rank, but through skill, preparation, and the quiet assertion of competence. The trident on her finger seemed to glint with quiet validation, a symbol of resilience meeting opportunity, experience meeting recognition. She moved to the next slide, outlining operational coordination with allied units, timing sequences, and risk mitigation strategies. Notice how each unit's position creates a layered defense and simultaneous disruption, she said, tracing the routes with the pointer. Even if the enemy attempts countermeasures, our overlapping checkpoints and rapid response teams ensure control without unnecessary escalation. Timing, precision, and coordination are critical. We cannot afford improvisation in these operations. The room remained silent, attentive, as every officer absorbed the layered complexity of her presentation. Even the colonel, whose earlier arrogance had dismissed her completely, seemed humbled by the depth and breadth of her expertise. He shifted in his seat, avoiding direct eye contact, while scribbling notes furiously. Others nodded to themselves, acknowledging her strategic foresight and operational rigor. Sarah did not allow herself to notice their reactions, remaining composed and deliberate, her authority inherent in every gesture, every word, every measured step. The lesson was clear. Competence commanded recognition far more than rank, title, or office ever could. The final slides focused on execution and potential outcomes. Sarah highlighted key checkpoints, anticipated enemy responses, and operational redundancies. Every scenario has been considered, she explained. We've accounted for variability in terrain, weather, enemy movement, and intelligence reliability. The plan is robust yet flexible, designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing risk to personnel and civilians alike. Her clarity, combined with years of field-tested insight, left no room for doubt. Officers were visibly impressed. Some leaned forward, absorbing every detail, while others exchanged subtle nods that conveyed recognition of her expertise. Carter leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant Mitchell," he said. "This is exactly the level of planning and execution we need. Your strategy is actionable, precise, and well considered. It's rare to see such clarity and preparedness in a briefing." Sarah acknowledged the compliment with a professional nod. There was no celebration, no flourish, only quiet satisfaction. She had converted the room's initial skepticism into respect and recognition. Her preparation had spoken louder than any argument could. As the briefing concluded, officers continued to discuss the operational details, many referencing slides and notes with renewed interest. Carter made one final observation. "Lieutenant Mitchell, your insights will be implemented immediately. Prepare your task force. You will lead the field operations based on this strategy." The announcement reverberated across the room. Some officers looked at each other in awe. Others glanced at Sarah, acknowledging the authority she had earned. She gathered her binder and equipment, moving with the same composed precision that had carried her through every moment of training and briefing alike. The colonel muttered an apology, almost inaudible, but Sarah did not respond. Professionalism demanded composure, and vindication had already been achieved. The trident on her finger glinted subtly, a quiet symbol of her endurance and expertise. The room had been transformed, doubt replaced by respect, skepticism replaced by acknowledgement, underestimation replaced by recognition. Sarah had taken what began as a task of humiliation and turned it into a demonstration of skill, command, and strategic insight. And as she stepped out of the briefing room, the officers whispered, scribbled notes, and recalibrated their understanding. The story of the lieutenant who had been ordered to pour coffee but commanded a room through preparation, insight, and unshakable authority would echo throughout the Pentagon. Sarah had proven one undeniable truth. Respect is earned through competence, resilience, and timing not by rank, protocol, or assumption. And Lieutenant Mitchell had earned it decisively, in full measure. The briefing room had emptied, but the energy lingered like static in the air. Officers murmured among themselves, the clatter of pens and rustle of papers, now replaced by hushed conversations about the lieutenant who had so decisively overturned their expectations. Sarah Mitchell gathered her binder and equipment, moving. With quiet precision, every step deliberate, every gesture calm and controlled. She had delivered her strategy flawlessly, yet she did not allow herself a moment of triumph. In her experience, results, not accolades, were the measure of success. The recognition would follow, but preparation was ongoing. Major General Carter lingered, his gaze following her movements with a mix of admiration and calculation. He had witnessed countless briefings in his career, but rarely had he seen the combination of composure, tactical insight, and real-world experience executed so seamlessly. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he called softly, yet authoritatively. Sarah turned, meeting his eyes. Carter gestured for her to approach. The colonel, still flushed and silent, stepped back, offering no resistance. Carter's presence alone communicated the weight of the moment. This was no casual acknowledgement, but a decisive recognition of competence and authority. "You handled that exceptionally," Carter said, his voice low but commanding. "Your preparation, clarity, and command of the room were remarkable. It's rare to see such mastery displayed with restraint and professionalism." Sarah nodded. Respectfully, her posture perfect, her expression neutral, though internally a sense of quiet satisfaction warmed her. Carter continued, "The officers underestimated you, and you've corrected that oversight. But more importantly, you've given us actionable intelligence and a strategy ready for implementation. That is invaluable." Sarah listened carefully, absorbing the weight of his words. She had always understood that recognition was secondary to preparation, but Carter's praise carried additional significance. It was not just acknowledgement, it was validation from someone whose judgment she respected, a figure with the authority to make operational decisions that could change the course of a mission. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice calm and measured. It was important that the intelligence be actionable, not just theoretical. Carter's gaze softened slightly, though his eyes retained their sharp precision. "You will now take the next step. Prepare a task force to execute the operational strategy you've outlined. I want you to lead the planning, deployment, and execution phases. Your experience, judgment, and insight make you the ideal choice for this responsibility." The words hung in the air, carrying both opportunity and obligation. Sarah's mind instantly shifted to operational logistics, personnel, assignments, supply coordination, deployment timing, and risk mitigation strategies. Every detail mattered. "Yes, sir," she said, nodding once. Internally, her thoughts raced through weeks of preparation. Leading a task force was an entirely different challenge than delivering a briefing. It required command presence in the field, rapid decision-making under pressure, and the ability to anticipate enemy movements in real time. Yet Sarah had been trained for such scenarios. The difference now was that the room she commanded would be larger, more complex, and the stakes higher. Lives would depend on her strategy, her timing, and her ability to adapt to unpredictable conditions. Carter leaned back slightly, considering her with the practiced discernment of someone accustomed to evaluating potential in high-pressure situations. "Lieutenant Mitchell, your performance today has changed the perception of competence in this room. That ripple will extend beyond these walls. Use it wisely. Lead decisively. Prepare thoroughly. And remember, the margin for error in the field is narrower than in the conference room." Sarah absorbed the guidance, committing each word to memory. Margin for error, minimal. Precision, absolute. Leadership, essential. Once the conversation ended, Sarah moved to a quieter corner of the Pentagon to begin immediate planning. She opened her binder, reviewing every slide, every data point, every projection. Her mind mapped out the operational phases in meticulous detail. She visualized troop movements, supply drops, choke points, timing sequences, and contingencies for unexpected enemy maneuvers. She considered personnel strengths and weaknesses, matching team members to tasks according to skill, experience, and adaptability. Every decision was deliberate, every potential outcome accounted for. Her fingers brushed the trident again, a subtle reminder of the endurance and skill that had brought her here. The ring was more than symbolic. It was a mental anchor. It reminded her that every challenge, every moment of doubt, every grueling exercise and field mission had prepared her for this. She had survived far harsher environments, endured far greater trials, and emerged stronger each time. And now, she was preparing to transform strategy into reality, commanding a team that would execute operations with precision and efficiency. The Pentagon corridors were alive with the usual bustle, but Sarah moved with quiet authority. Colleagues and officers glanced at her, some offering nods of respect, others exchanging whispered observations about the recent briefing. She ignored them, maintaining focus. Recognition was secondary. Execution was primary. Her task force would rely on her decisions, and any hesitation could cost lives. Every map, every projection, every contingency plan had to be flawless. She reviewed them repeatedly, ensuring there were no oversights, no gaps, no vulnerabilities. Hours later, the planning room was filled with personnel she would soon command. She greeted each quietly, observing posture, demeanor, and readiness. They were skilled, but untested under her direct command. Sarah began the orientation, detailing operational objectives, emphasizing the importance of timing, coordination, and adaptability. She spoke with authority rooted in experience, not ego. Every explanation, every instruction, every cautionary note reinforced her credibility. The officers and soldiers listened intently, noting her calm precision, her depth of preparation, and the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. By the end of the day, the task force had a detailed operational plan, complete with contingencies, checkpoints, and communication protocols. Sarah reviewed it once more, ensuring that every detail aligned with her projections. She walked the team through the mission step by step, simulating scenarios and assessing responses. Each member understood their role, the expectations, and the importance of adaptability under pressure. The group had shifted from initial skepticism to trust, recognizing in Sarah the rare combination of preparation, experience, and composure necessary for leadership in high-stakes operations. As the sun set over the Pentagon, Sarah sat quietly reviewing her notes once more. The room was still alive with activity, yet a calm focus surrounded her. She reflected briefly on the path that had brought her here, the relentless grind of training, the moments of doubt, the grueling tests that had forged resilience and precision. The trident gleamed in the fading light, a reminder that endurance, preparation, and timing were always more powerful than superficial authority. She had been underestimated once, but now she commanded attention and respect. Tomorrow, the task force would move. They would execute the strategy she had designed, using every skill, insight, and contingency she had prepared. Lives depended on the operation, and she felt the weight of that responsibility keenly. Yet she remained composed, steady, confident. Every detail had been accounted for, every potential challenge anticipated. The storm of operations was approaching, but Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was ready. She had trained for far worse, endured far more, and emerged prepared to lead decisively. And as the evening settled over the Pentagon, one truth was clear. The lieutenant who had once been relegated to pouring coffee had transformed a room, reshaped perceptions, and now stood fully prepared to execute strategy and command respect. In the field, the trident on her finger was no longer merely a symbol of endurance. It was a beacon of authority, skill, and unwavering preparation. The early morning air was sharp and biting as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell surveyed the staging area. The team, handpicked and rigorously briefed, moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment, reviewing maps, and running last-minute communications. Tests. Despite the chill, her mind was fully focused. Every detail mattered. Troop placement, timing, contingencies, terrain, and potential enemy responses. The trident on her finger caught the first rays of dawn, a subtle reminder of the resilience and training that had brought her to this moment. Today, coffee service had transformed into command. She began with a calm briefing, reiterating key objectives. Our goal is disruption, not confrontation. Precision is essential. Every movement, every checkpoint, every decision will be calculated. And deliberate. Deviation without reason is not an option. The officers and enlisted personnel listened intently, their eyes reflecting a mix of focus and determination. Sarah's authority was unspoken yet undeniable. Her experience radiated through every instruction, every gesture, every word. As the team moved out, the terrain became a living challenge. Dirt roads, narrow passes, and hidden junctions demanded vigilance. Sarah's eyes scanned constantly, noting shadows, unusual movement, and subtle environmental cues. Each observation was catalogued mentally, matched against intelligence reports and predictive patterns. The enemy was adaptive, unpredictable, and dangerous, but so was her team under her leadership. Every soldier had been briefed on contingency, protocols, overlapping checkpoints, and rapid response procedures. The first checkpoint loomed ahead, a critical junction identified in her briefing. Sarah signaled for the team to slow, moving silently through the brush, every step calculated. The trident gleamed subtly as she adjusted her grip on the radio, communicating with auxiliary units to ensure coverage of secondary routes. Her mind moved several steps ahead. If the enemy approached from the north, the response team would intercept. If from the east, alternate units would engage. Timing, coordination, and precision were everything. A sudden movement caught her attention, a shadowy figure attempting to bypass the primary checkpoint. Sarah's voice, calm but authoritative over the radio, directed the nearest squad. Interception team, northeast flank. Move now. Maintain cover and minimal exposure. Within seconds, the enemy was neutralized without escalation. The operation's first test had passed, executed flawlessly. Officers and soldiers alike felt the difference between theory and action, witnessing the effectiveness of strategy informed by experience and foresight. The team advanced, moving through a network of routes carefully chosen to maximize disruption, while minimizing risk. Sarah constantly monitored progress, adjusting movements in real time based on updated intelligence and environmental conditions. The terrain tested endurance and precision. Steep inclines, narrow passes, and unpredictable weather required constant attention. Yet, the team followed her guidance seamlessly, trusting her judgment and preparation. Every decision she made reflected years of training, discipline, and field experience. At midday, they reached a key resupply node, a location crucial to enemy operations. Sarah signaled for reconnaissance drones to deploy, scanning the area for potential threats. Confirm. Positions? Avoid engagement unless necessary. Priority. Intelligence, not conflict, she instructed. The team executed flawlessly, neutralizing only the necessary components of the supply network while leaving civilians unaffected. Precision and efficiency had replaced uncertainty, and her leadership was the anchor that ensured disciplined execution. A sudden challenge arose. An unexpected patrol emerged from a hidden path. Communication channels crackled with tension. Sarah's mind assessed options instantly. Diversion team, intercept north, maintain cover. Main team, advance along planned route. Do not deviate unless instructed. The coordinated movement was seamless. Enemy forces were rerouted and contained without unnecessary risk. Her decisions were swift, deliberate, and precise, reflecting training, experience, and the ability to anticipate moves several steps ahead. By late afternoon, the team had successfully disrupted multiple supply points, intercepted enemy movements, and maintained full situational awareness. No errors, no unnecessary engagement, no civilian casualties. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, a testament to preparation and execution under pressure. Officers in the field, many who had previously doubted her capability, now moved with confidence, following Sarah's lead with unwavering trust. Her authority, once questioned in the conference room, was now solidified in the field. During a brief pause, Sarah gathered the team for a check-in. Evaluate status, confirm position, identify any unforeseen challenges. Reports came quickly. Minor logistical adjustments, slight weather complications, nothing that could jeopardize objectives. Sarah acknowledged each point, adjusting movement orders with calm precision. Every team member understood their role, their responsibility, and the importance of adherence to strategy. Execution was seamless because preparation had been meticulous and leadership clear. Even the most skeptical officers were impressed. A lieutenant whispered to a colleague, "I thought she was just a briefcase strategist. This is real command." Sarah, overhearing the faint whisper, allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement, but remained composed. Leadership demanded focus, not display. Respect was earned through results, not acknowledgement. And today, every action, every decision, every calculated movement reflected competence beyond question. As dusk approached, the final stage of the operation commenced, returning to base while maintaining coverage of the disrupted supply network. Sarah calculated timing precisely, coordinating checkpoints, ensuring reconnaissance remained active, and maintaining communication integrity. Every unit moved in coordination, anticipating possible enemy attempts to reclaim lost ground. The operation's complexity had tested endurance, intelligence, and adaptability, but preparation and precise leadership ensured success. By nightfall, the team returned to base, mission completed. Supplies disrupted, enemy routes compromised, and all personnel accounted for. Sarah took a moment to debrief with her officers, reviewing outcomes and minor adjustments for future operations. Every decision had been validated by execution. The efficiency and precision of the mission reflected not just strategy, but the seamless integration of experience, discipline, and leadership under pressure. Carter's voice came over secure, channeled shortly after debrief. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I've reviewed initial field reports. Exceptional execution. The strategy was flawless, and your command ensured minimal risk and maximal impact. Prepare for follow-up operations. Your task force is now operationally validated." Sarah responded calmly, acknowledging the directive and beginning mental preparations for the next phase. Success was not a moment to rest on, but a foundation to build upon. The trident on her finger gleamed in the faint light of the operations room. It had once symbolized personal endurance and achievement. Now, it marked the tangible impact of leadership and strategy in action. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had not just commanded respect in a conference room. She had earned it in the field, in the most challenging and consequential environment she had faced yet. Her team's trust, the success of the mission, and Carter's acknowledgement all confirmed that authority, once questioned, had been solidified through competence and execution. As she reviewed field reports, made adjustments to plans, and coordinated with her officers for the next phase, Sarah reflected briefly on the path that had led here. Every grueling training session, Every test of endurance, every moment of doubt and perseverance had culminated in this reality. Leadership was not granted, it was earned, demonstrated, and proven in action. Today, she had proven it decisively. And as the night settled over the operational base, one truth was undeniable. The lieutenant who had once been underestimated, ordered to serve coffee, had transformed perception into reality, command into action, and preparation into measurable success. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had become more than a strategist or officer. She was a leader in full command, her authority forged through experience, resilience, and decisive execution in the field. Dawn broke over the operational base, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the compound, surveying the field they had worked so tirelessly to secure. The mission was complete. Supply lines disrupted, enemy movements contained, and civilians left unharmed. Every objective had been achieved with precision and efficiency. Yet Sarah did not linger on personal satisfaction. Her mind was already cataloging lessons learned, considering adjustments for future operations, ensuring that success today would translate into even greater effectiveness tomorrow. Carter arrived shortly afterward, moving with a purposeful stride. He had reviewed the field reports, analyzed outcomes, and followed every transmission from the operation. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, his voice steady yet imbued with genuine respect, "your execution was flawless. Every detail, every contingency, every team movement perfectly aligned with your initial strategy. The results speak for themselves." Sarah nodded, allowing the acknowledgement to register quietly. Recognition, she reminded herself, was secondary to preparation and results. Yet Carter's words carried significance. Validation from someone of his experience reinforced the magnitude of her accomplishment. The task force gathered for a debrief, officers and enlisted personnel alike standing with a quiet energy, a mixture of relief, pride, and admiration. They had trusted her guidance, executed complex maneuvers, and succeeded where many might have faltered. Sarah led the debrief methodically, reviewing each phase of the operation, noting successes and minor deviations, and discussing lessons for future missions. Her feedback was precise, constructive, and designed to strengthen every member's understanding and performance. Leadership was not a display, it was cultivation, preparation, and measured guidance. The officers who had once doubted her competence now stood attentive, nodding, asking questions, and demonstrating respect earned through action rather than rank. The colonel, previously dismissive, approached hesitantly. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I thank you. Your planning, your execution. It's remarkable," he stammered. Sarah acknowledged him with a brief nod, maintaining professionalism. Vindication was not in words or apologies. It was in the results, and the trust she had built with her team. Every glance, every action, every decision in the field had demonstrated the truth of her capability. Carter observed quietly, his mind, noting both the operational success and the subtle transformation in the room's perception. "Your leadership today has reset expectations," he said, "not just for this task force, but across units who may have underestimated your experience or authority. Competence has a way of speaking louder than titles, and today it spoke clearly." Sarah's response was measured. She had long learned the value of patience, discipline, and preparation over immediate recognition. Yet hearing it from Carter carried weight. It signaled that her authority would resonate beyond this operation. After the debrief, Sarah walked the perimeter, quietly reviewing field reports and reconnaissance data on her tablet. Every detail of the mission was logged, analyzed, and confirmed for accuracy. Minor discrepancies were noted, contingencies reviewed, and follow-up tasks assigned. The operation had been successful, but perfection was never assumed. Preparation and foresight demanded continuous refinement. The trident on her finger gleamed subtly in the early morning light, a symbol of resilience, endurance, and earned authority, now fully realized in the field. Her team watched her with a mixture of respect and quiet awe. They had seen firsthand the difference between theoretical planning and real-world execution, and they recognized in her the combination of discipline, experience, and strategic insight that made leadership effective. Lieutenant Mitchell had transformed from an officer dismissed as a mere observer into a leader who commanded respect through action, decisiveness, and unwavering professionalism. The lesson was clear. Authority was not granted, it was earned, through capability and results. Later, Carter called a formal recognition meeting in the operations room. Officers who had witnessed both the briefing and field operations were present. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he began, "today's mission exceeded expectations in every measurable way. Your strategic insight, leadership, and execution have saved lives, disrupted enemy operations, and set a standard for operational excellence. You've demonstrated that preparation, skill, and experience define authority far more than rank or perception." The room was silent, every officer acknowledging the weight of his words. Sarah stood calmly, absorbing the recognition without display. Leadership was not about personal glory. It was about results, influence, and responsibility. Yet in this acknowledgement, there was a quiet satisfaction. A long journey of endurance, training, and trials had culminated in a moment of undeniable validation. Every obstacle, every doubter, every moment of underestimation had been overcome. Through competence, discipline, and perseverance, the room that had once underestimated her now understood the magnitude of her abilities. As the recognition concluded, Carter approached privately. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you've set a benchmark for operational leadership," he said. "I want you to consider long-term assignments where your expertise can be applied strategically and tactically. The Pentagon will benefit greatly from officers like you leading initiatives, task forces, and critical operations." Sarah acknowledged him with a calm nod. Her focus remained on preparation, execution, and results, but the opportunity for broader influence was undeniable. Leadership, she realized, extended beyond a single mission. It shaped policy, perception, and outcomes across units. Back at the base, Sarah walked among her task force, speaking quietly with officers and soldiers alike. She highlighted individual contributions, acknowledged diligence, and reinforced lessons learned. Every member of the team had played a role in the mission's success, and she ensured they understood the importance of their contributions. Leadership, she believed, was as much about developing those around you as it was about making decisions under pressure. Her mentorship strengthened the team's cohesion, trust, and effectiveness for future missions. As the day drew to a close, Sarah paused outside the operations room, taking a quiet moment to reflect. The path that had brought her here, from relentless training, grueling exercises, and moments of doubt to commanding a task force in real-world operations, was long, arduous, and tested every measure of her resilience. She traced the trident on her finger, a symbol of every challenge she had overcome and every victory she had earned. What began as a task as trivial as serving coffee had transformed into full recognition of her skill, authority, and leadership. The officers who had once underestimated her now regarded her with respect and quiet admiration. Her success was not accidental. It was earned through meticulous preparation, mental toughness, and real-world expertise. Sarah had demonstrated that perception could be shifted not by words, but by results, and that true authority was demonstrated through competence, calm under pressure, and decisive action. Every movement in the field, every strategic decision, every moment of leadership had reinforced a fundamental truth: respect is earned, not given. By evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, The task force settled into base routines, reports filed, and debriefs completed. Sarah reviewed final data, ensured all follow-ups were assigned, and prepared for the next phase of operations. Success was not a point of rest. It was a foundation upon which future achievements would be built. The trident, gleaming in the fading light, symbolized not just past accomplishments, but the ongoing journey of leadership, responsibility, and excellence. And in that quiet moment, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a subtle but profound acknowledgement. She had transformed doubt into respect, hesitation into confidence, and skepticism into recognition. She had proven that authority is forged through experience, skill, and resilience. From coffee service to commanding a mission with precision and impact, her journey reflected the indomitable spirit, discipline, and leadership required of an elite officer. The room, the mission, and her task force now understood one unshuckable truth. Lieutenant Mitchell was not just capable, she was extraordinary.